Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Mitch. Good Wednesday evening to you all. I hope you guys are doing well out there tonight, and I certainly appreciate you folks tuning in this evening as we continue to try to figure out what's going to happen with Hurricane Lee. Lee is no longer a major hurricane and won't ever be a major hurricane again, which is that Category 3 status or higher. He is down to a Category 2 hurricane now and will continue to weaken for the rest of its life until eventually it does make landfall here in the next few days and completely dissipates. Lee has been a hurricane that's been with us for a while now, reached that peak intensity of 165 mile per hour Cat 5 at one point, and we pretty much have some really good confidence on what Lee is going to do now. So we're going to talk about all that. We'll talk about how he's doing out there right now, latest information from the National Hurricane Center, latest information from some of this model guidance that we have that's really starting to come together now, and then we'll break down the impacts that I'm sure a lot of people are really tuning in about, because everybody, I'm sure, that is in the path of this system wants to know what it's going to happen in their front or backyard for sure. So we'll break all that down, and then stay tuned if you're interested for the second half of the video. We'll talk about that area of interest out there in the tropical Atlantic, which will likely become our next named storm, which is the end name, which is Nigel. So be careful with what you hear about Nigel, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to hype the heck out of this storm. But we'll talk about what we know on that area of interest in the second half of the video. If you folks have not subscribed, certainly consider doing that. Like the video if you like it. And thank y'all so much for the incredible support. Thank you for you folks in Canada who have corrected me on some of these names and how you pronounce them. And just being so kind. Just so incredibly kind. It's been awesome picking up an audience from Canada, outside the U.S. So thank y'all, and thank you to everybody else too that's been tuning into my channel. My channel is nothing flashy, nothing great. I do it in my, in my room here, and in fact, I don't even have any covers on my bed behind me because we're cleaning them right now. So this is about as raw as it gets. I don't edit my videos. I just come on here and I try to get a good flow going and talk weather with you guys. So thank y'all for appreciating me for who I am. And I appreciate y'all supporting me in the way y'all do. If you guys got anything I can pray about or pray over, as always, please put those in the comments below. Not only do I pray over those, but others do too. So definitely do that, guys. It's a great way to glorify God through prayer. Let's get rolling. So this is Lee. I mean, Lee's got a nice eye back to him again. I honestly did not think we would see this again with Lee. But Lee's a weaker hurricane than he was in this morning's video, right? But he's got a well-defined eye. And still a classic looking hurricane out here. It hasn't really lost those tropical characteristics yet, but a very defined, basically low-level circulation with convection still wrapping around it. Now you do have some void spots, some dry areas. Certainly don't have intense convection around this entire tropical system as it's weakened, but still a powerful hurricane out there in the Atlantic. Another way to look at this is just the satellite visibility as the sun's beginning to set. That's why your screen kind of dulls out there. The sun is beginning to set on the Atlantic, and as the sun is going to slowly start to set on the eastern U.S. here soon also. But this thing's spinning away, still moving pretty slow, but over the next really 24 hours, it will really begin to pick up some forward speed. Bermuda is starting to get some outer bands already. This thing is going to make a pretty close pass to Bermuda. And I want to thank you folks in Bermuda, too, for commenting. You guys, pretty much doubled down on what I said about you guys' the structure of your buildings and basically the geographical features of Bermuda. Really basically supporting the fact that you guys are really well built for any powerful storms like this. And of course, with Lee not taking a direct landfall on Bermuda, I really think you guys can handle this system. But with Lee having such a very broad wind field, you guys are certainly going to see some full-fledged tropical storm force conditions and maybe some brief hurricane force wind gusts out there. But this thing is a very large hurricane. It's a beautiful looking hurricane out here. You can kind of say that, right, because it's not bothering anybody right now. The structure of this hurricane will certainly go downhill in the coming days as dry air from this trough pushing in will get wrapped into this circulation, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when we get about 2 days from now. This thing will really start looking very extra tropical. It will lose those tropical characteristics, but definitely a beauty of a hurricane out there this evening, but could potentially become a deadly hurricane here in the next few days as it ultimately makes landfall. The last pass from a few hours back from the hurricane hunters, did indicate still a very strong system with winds still pushing 80 to 100 knots in certain areas. You see these kind of whitish pink colors right here on the northeast quadrant of this storm and down here on the southeast quadrant of this storm. So you're still getting hefty conditions, especially on the eastern side of this storm right now. So I would say that is a stronger portion of the storm as of a few hours ago. But you can tell, you compare this with when we talked about this in last night's video, you can see there's some weak spots with this system. You can tell there's some lower winds here in the red. That's winds pushing 55 to 60, 65, 70 knots, which is still very strong, obviously. But you can tell it's just not as strong as of a hurricane anymore. The pressure has risen to around 952, 953, and will probably continue to slowly rise. Latest information from the National Hurricane Center from around the 5 p.m. update, 952 central pressure storm, millibar storm. It's 105 mile per hour, high end category 2, and it is now moving northwest at 10 miles per hour. So it's back to those double-digit mile per hour readings, starting to pick up a little bit more speed. And it's almost at this point moving due north. Still a little bit of a push west, but definitely moving more north at this point than west. Okay, Margot, a pretty stout hurricane out here, a high-end category 1 hurricane, 90 mile per hour hurricane. Then we got the area of interest, Invest 97L, that we will discuss in the second half of the video. Latest cone, check it out. You got hurricane watches up now for areas of Maine, for the down east areas and the central coastal regions of Maine, and then tropical storm watches up for the yellow regions, which basically extend down to the southern coast of Maine, all the way to the coastal regions of New Hampshire. All of the eastern sections of Mass, includes Boston, and then even the coastal sections of like Rhode Island, a very small section of extreme eastern, the southeastern section of Connecticut. And of course, we're definitely going to get tropical storm warnings probably issued for Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket. And you definitely are probably going to get an upgrade to a hurricane warning, I think, for areas of Maine. So, you got the tropical storm warnings up for Bermuda. I think they will remain that way. I don't think we'll get an upgrade to a hurricane warning or anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do. But look how large this wind field is right here in the yellowish orange color here. Huge tropical storm force wind field for Lee out here for sure. And then even hurricane force wind conditions extend pretty far out, maybe 100, 200 miles away from out of the center of circulation of Lee. Another way to look at this is really great. You can interact with this really well, is Zoom Earth. It's a great site, guys. Most of this stuff I'm showing you, most of it, 90% of this stuff I'm showing you guys is free, available to the public. Tropical Tidbits is one of the best free weather sites there is. And when it comes to the tropics, that's where I show most of the stuff to you guys. But tropical storm warnings up. Tropical storm warnings up for Bermuda. You guys are already starting to see some impacts from this as Bermuda, I'm calling the hurricane Bermuda, as Hurricane Lee creeps to your west and passes to your west. Still should be a category 2 hurricane as it is approaching to your west. It'll still be several hundred miles away as far as that center of circulation. But of course, we know that the impacts spread much further out, several hundred, I would say a few to maybe, I would say, 200-300 miles away from the actual center of circulation, this low pressure. There's still some pretty high-end impacts being felt. But this is a large storm. The wind, basically the northern cloud shield of Lee is already reaching way up here in the North Atlantic. Okay, so it's a large system for sure, and we were expecting this to happen. But forecast to weaken into a Category 1 hurricane sometime Friday afternoon. Still forecast to be a Category 1, large Category 1 hurricane by Saturday afternoon. And at this point, you guys are already seeing the impacts here in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and definitely Maine, and certainly even before this in areas of southern New England, and then Newfoundland. And someone says you guys, you really sound out the land in Newfoundland. I don't want to spend too much time on kind of mind thinking too much on these names because I'll lose my flow. But Newfoundland could definitely see some impacts from this as we get to the end of this weekend, early next week. But I really think this system will lose some steam by then. But I want to check this out. This is radar out of Bermuda. Somebody shared this with me on Facebook, and I really appreciate you very much. It's a great link that shows the radar out of Bermuda, because on radar scope, we can't see a radar out of Bermuda. But if you look right here, this is Bermuda. Here it comes. Here's the rain shield from Lee coming up, and this is one of the most further northern basically rain bands about to hit Bermuda right now. So you guys are already starting to see actual precipitation. There'll probably be some gusty winds in some of these outer bands from Lee already coming up from the south. So definitely hunker down. It's going to get dicey for you folks. Strong winds definitely coming up from the south. Let's take a look at some of this model guidance. We'll take a look at the Euro first, and then we'll take a look at the GFS. We'll start off Friday afternoon, and here comes Lee creeping up at this bottom of your screen over here, and a massive storm system moving in. We're getting into Friday evening, getting into overnight Friday into Saturday morning, and here comes the rain moving in into all the communities in Southeast Mass, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, Cape Cod. You guys are starting to see rain from this. The winds are probably picking up. This is starting to move into areas of Nova Scotia. Excuse me. Yarmouth, not Yarmouth. I don't blame y'all for laughing. That's hilarious. I didn't realize that you don't pronounce the mouth. That's what I get for typing in Google and typing in, how do you pronounce Yarmouth or Yarmouth, Canada? And they said Yarmouth. So my bad, guys. Google led me astray. But Google's probably not a local Canadian. So it's Yarmouth. Just like, what, Plymouth? So anyways, there I go, getting hung up on that too long. But we're getting into Friday nights, and this is getting into the wee hours Saturday. The latest Euro does not take this as close to our folks here in southern New England, and eastern Mass, and Rhode Island. But it does bring the rain shield inland with some gusty winds with it, and it does push inland. But I really think that the rainfall gradient with this, the rain shield is going to be a very tight gradient, what I'm saying is you'll go from like no rain to a decent amount of rain in a very small amount of area. I really think the western side of this storm is going to be loaded because dry air is going to wrap around this circulation and basically create a dry slot, I think, on the eastern side. But we stop it here. This is about mid-morning Saturday morning. You got rain, heavy rain beginning to move into Maine, affecting areas of southern New England, moving into the New Brunswick area, the southern New Brunswick communities, Nova Scotia, and this is moving in. And then ultimately we get into Saturday afternoon, and it's doing that thing where it gets into the Gulf of Maine, and then it gets into the Bay of Fundy, and basically kind of gets tucked into the bay there and actually just kind of rides into the bay. And the latest Euro makes a technical landfall, meaning the center of that low pressure, into areas like right into St. John. Right into St. John, sometimes Saturday night into Sunday morning. Like literally goes, the center of the storm literally goes right over the community of St. John. Then it rides up here, and then we can go on and flip it to this. And here it comes. And we'll stop it here, actually. This is around 10, 11 p.m. Out here, Eastern time. This is in Eastern time. And, I mean, you got the center of this circulation right here between the western tip of Nova Scotia and the down east areas of Maine, starting to inch its way into the Bay of Fundy. And you got Grand Manan Island, I believe that's how you pronounce it. I really think you guys, whoever lives out there, if you're tuning in, definitely say hi. I think you're right in the crosshairs of basically the actual center of the storm moving, if not right over you guys, and really close to you guys. Okay, if this thing moves east of you guys, then it'll probably bring more heavier impacts. So I would say wherever the actual center of this L is, which is the center of circulation, if you're just west of that, I think that's where the heaviest impacts will be. So this will push a lot of water into the Bay of Fundy, will probably cause issues with storm surge, and we'll see how this happens. But I know that the elevation is definitely different in Maine and these areas, as basically you got some higher elevations that go right up into these coastal communities. I'm sure not everybody, but I know definitely in Maine there's some higher hills and higher elevations that people probably don't even realize that's how the coastal regions of Maine is actually is. Maybe not everybody, you guys, of course. I've never even been there, and I'm speaking like I have, but just kind of looking at the geography of Maine and things like that. It's one area that I would love to go. One day I will. One day me and my wife going to get a little small RV and travel the country. Anyways, there I go, getting off into something else, guys. But anyways, Like I said, this rides right into the Bay of Fundy, and then it begins to bring impacts to, it's still bringing impacts to Nova Scotia. I don't want to kind of discount the impacts for Nova Scotia, but I really think the east side of the storm will not be as strong, which means, with Nova Scotia being on the east side of the storm, you guys like Halifax for sure, Yarmouth, you guys certainly would not get as heavy impacts. You get into Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown is it looks like the bigger town or community or city into Prince Edward Island. And this would probably ride really close to the island, but I really think that this system, even though it's large, will lose some of its steam and won't be quite as high impact as Fiona. I think a lot of people up here in Southeast Canada are really spooked from Fiona, and rightfully so. That system did a lot more damage up in Southeast Canada than I think I realized. And a lot of people realize, as a lot of people have commented, they're still forest flattened in certain areas. The difference between that storm and this storm is it really slows down into the Gulf of Maine. And there's definitely much cooler temperatures in the Gulf of Maine than there is, say, once you get into this area of the Atlantic. Okay, temperatures dramatically drop off. Somebody said, Mitch, the temperatures aren't quite as cold as what you're saying they are. There's some buoys out here in the Gulf of Maine that I think are registering still 70 degrees, which still is not warm enough to support tropical development, but maybe not as cool as what the graphic that I showed you in this morning video indicates. But anyways, here comes the latest GFS coming in. This is getting into the middle of the night, Friday night into Saturday morning, and here it comes. You're getting some impacts way out here in Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and certainly in the Nantucket area. And this thing looks like it moves up, it's moving north, and then it jogs northeast. That's not what you want to see for our folks in New England. You do not want this area right here moving onshore. This is going to cause a lot of heavy rain and a lot of gusty winds. But then it stops moving west and moves back north, kind of takes the same route as the Euro. And here it comes. It's starting to creep deeper into the Gulf of Maine. And then it looks like it does exactly what the Euro does and tries to, it's like it sees the Bay of Fundy, and it deliberately goes right into the bay. And you stop it here, and we'll take another look at this here on this way. And here it comes up on your screen. Let's get this in motion. I'm going to have to do this on the fly here. And here it comes right here. Look at the center of circulation. Look how the worst is on the west side of the storm. And this is getting into around 4, 5, 6 p.m. Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. And it quite literally makes a turn right into the Bay of Fundy. Okay, this would bring big impacts to St. John, to Grand Manan Island. Certainly right up Highway 1, Highway 2. I don't know if y'all call it Road 2, Highway 2 in Canada. You guys definitely correct me on that. But, for my folks in Nova Scotia, you guys would be on the east side of the storm, which would still have strong winds, gusty winds, especially if you're way like in the Yarmouth area. If you're in the extreme western areas of Nova Scotia, like what is that, Medigan? You guys, Weymouth. I'm assuming you guys pronounce Weymouth. The sound is the same as you pronounce Yarmouth. Digby. You guys, I think, could get some very gusty winds because this really creeps really close to that western end of Nova Scotia. And this basically rides up the Bay of Fundy, heavily impacts these areas with some heavy rain, strong winds, but it's definitely much different than Fiona. And I really think the winds drop off maybe substantially as it gets into this area just due to cooler waters, but we're getting into about 5 a.m. Sunday morning. This is basically riding right up the bay and then making its way into comes right up towards Amherst, the Oxford area, and basically heads right towards Prince Edward Island. This would bring impacts for you guys as we're getting into our Sunday morning. Okay, some gusty winds, heavy rain. I don't think you're going to get significant totals of rain. But I definitely think you will obviously get some rain and some gusty winds. But I really think that by the time it gets here, it'll lose some steam. This will not be Fiona. And this is because this really kind of slows down in this area here. Fiona just raced through here and didn't really have any time to really lose any steam. So I want to show you why this storm becomes post-tropical, extratropical, really loses those tropical characteristics. Right now, it's a full-fledged tropical system. Okay, as it moves north, you see this brown area? This is dry air associated with the trough that we've been talking about that weakens over the eastern U.S., but it still has impacts for this tropical system because there's a lot of dry air nearby, and of course the tropical system spins, right? So that dry air basically mashes up against this tropical air. Look at this tight gradient between tropical air and dry air. And what happens here is, as we keep moving this forward, is this system becomes north and west weighted, which means all the worst weather is on that side. And here it comes. See all this dry air right in here? All this basically gets pulled into Lee's circulation. So it basically makes this entire side not completely void of moisture, but it's much drier. A lot of dry air gets wrapped into this system. So you take this off and you keep moving and you see it even more. I mean, look at this. This is a great example of it right here. This is around Saturday afternoon. All the moisture is right into here, right? Eventually, this will kind of push into this region or more so into this way, and this big plume of moisture will get pushed into southeast Canada. But look how all this dry air is wrapping into here. In fact, there's a chance that areas of Nova Scotia don't get hardly any rain. You definitely will get rain and gusty winds, but look at all this dry air being pulled and wrapped around to the east side of Lee. It's very, very impressive display by the HAF model, which is a hurricane model. And here we go. Just realized I had another cat in here. Literally deja vu from yesterday, as I have Kylo, my black cat, in here wanting to greet us. But let's talk about impacts here, and let's just try to ignore that and not lose the flow because of a cat. Here we go. This is impacts. If something like the Euro plays out, this is predicted wind gust in miles per hour. You could certainly get some gusty conditions in southern New England. You combine this with the rain and already the saturated soils up here, then it's a recipe for trees falling down, landing on houses, power lines, people losing power. So let's go on and just zoom into this. For my folks in the southern New England, if a European scenario was to play out, certainly out here in Nantucket, Cape Cod, you guys could get 60, 70 mile per hour wind gusts. That doesn't mean you're going to get 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts for hours on end. Just some wind gusts. Boston, maybe a 40, 45 mile per hour wind gust. Rhode Island, kind of the same thing. Okay, you could get some wind enhancement off some of these higher elevations right here in southern New England. Okay, the Worcester Hills. We won't go back into that, but for you folks that were tuning in for the nor'easter back in March, you guys in Massachusetts, Mass know that I struggled with that for a while. Anyways, gusty winds in southern New England. I mean, even looking eastern Long Island, maybe a 30, 40 mile per hour wind gust is quite possible. We go up to Maine, and hold on, I'll let you out here in a second. We go up to Maine, and the strongest winds are really tucked up against the coastal regions of Maine. Okay, but I could definitely see. I think you guys said in like Bangor, you guys pronounce it a little bit differently than what I've been saying. But, those areas up here, which is right into here in Maine, you could still get, a 40, 50 mile per hour wind gust, and certainly winds 30 to 40 miles per hour sustained. You go down here for my folks down here in like Portland, very strong winds are possible. And you're going to get a big old rain shield that potentially pushes in, could give you a couple inches of rain. You combine that with the rain you've already got. In some of these areas with the gusty winds, you're going to get some down trees. Okay, so for my folks up here in Canada, now I do want to mention this first. Let's go back to Mass. This is what the GFS is showing for you guys, because I don't want to just show one scenario. The GFS has a much larger wind field, even though the GFS is a little bit further east. But same scenario, not a whole lot changes from this. I'd argue that the winds are a little bit stronger as far as wind gusts for areas like Boston, for areas just a little bit further west. Okay, you're going to have some 30 to 40, 45 mile per hour wind gusts in southern New Hampshire, southeast New Hampshire, even some strong winds in areas of eastern and southeastern and southern areas of Vermont. All of southern New England basically could get 30 to 40 45, 50 mile per hour wind gusts. And I know you're thinking that ain't nothing up here, Mitch. And it probably is. I'm sure you've had some nor'easters that has produced much stronger winds than this. But with the ground's already saturated, this could spell trouble. Okay. And for my folks in Maine, same deal. You know, you got to get tucked up against the coast to get those tropical storm force conditions. But I'm telling you, once you get over here to the down east areas of Maine, you guys could get some hurricane force conditions. In fact, they might issue those hurricane warnings up for you guys. You guys have hurricane watches right now. You don't see that often in Maine. Okay? And my folks here in Canada, I know you guys measure things a little bit differently, but this is what it looks like in miles per hour. But I think you guys measure things in kilometers per hour. So let's look at that. And certainly some strong winds, guys. I mean, you got winds. It's saying that you could have almost an 80 kilometer per hour wind gust. And what is that? St. John. Okay. It says that you can get in Yarmouth maybe 110 kilometer per hour. It'll take me a while to get used to that. We need to talk more on the weather up here in Canada so we can memorize all this stuff, right? But it's showing here in basically the extreme western coastal regions of Nova Scotia getting over 100 kilometer per hour wind gust potential, not sustained, but just some gusts. And then we make our way over here to like Prince Edward Island. You know, you guys could certainly get some wind gusts pushing that 60 to 70 kilometers per hour, just wind gusts. And yeah, I mean, so it's definitely something to be aware of and be concerned about. But I know I keep saying this, and I hope that this doesn't end up being equivalent to Fiona, but I really don't think this will be as bad as what Fiona was. But I need to stop saying that because watch it end up being, and I look bad. But let's hope that it's not. Let's hope that it's not. But you guys have every right to be aware of this system for sure. But definitely some stronger wind gusts. Of course, stop the screen if you need to see this, but you're going to get some strong winds into the actual Bay of Fundy, and even these southern and southwestern coastal regions of Nova Scotia. You got some strong winds. I mean, Liverpool, Sable River, Lockport, Shelbourne. I mean, I know those are smaller communities, but just naming off some of those, you guys are definitely going to get that more on the east side, so that onshore flow that's going to get pushed onto these regions. So definitely need to watch out for these winds. And we take a look at the GFS as far as what it shows, and yeah, very strong winds in the same areas. It's basically equivalent to the Euro. It really is not much different than the Euro. All right, so this is the chance to see tropical storm force winds based off the National Hurricane Center. Bermuda, I mean, you guys have about a pretty much 50 to 60% chance, but you definitely are going to see it. But check it out as this gets nosed into the Bay of Fundy right into here. You get a 60 to 70% chance of tropical storm force conditions, and you basically got over a 50% chance of those conditions into St. John, into areas of western Nova Scotia, into areas of the coastal regions of Maine. And I would say Boston, you got that 10 to 20 to 30% chance to see tropical storm force conditions. Out on Cape Cod, you got about a 30 to 40% chance to see this, but this will change. This will tweak some, and this is the time frame. I'm not gonna sound out every time frame. You guys just freeze the screen here, but this is the kind of the time stamps on when you can expect tropical storm force winds right here. Okay, and then talking about storm surge as of right at this moment. Unfortunately for my folks in Canada, I tried to look at the Canadian weather page, but man, I only was on it for 5 minutes. I'll be completely honest, but I couldn't really jive with it. I couldn't really figure it out. It really wasn't clear to me. That's not a knock on anything for you folks in Canada, but I just couldn't really figure it out. I wanted to give you guys better information as far as peak storm surge, but definitely stick to your locals as far as the storm surge, what you're expecting into the Bay of Fundy, into the coastal regions of Nova Scotia. But this is the storm surge for our folks here in southern New England. You definitely could get 1 to 2 foot of storm surge into Long Island, and you're definitely going to get a big time northerly flow that's going to give areas like in Cape Cod Bay and just even into Boston, maybe 2 to 4 feet of storm surge, because you're going to get a stout flow moving in from this way. So definitely be aware of just a little bit of storm surge for sure. This is the wind. This is the rainfall predicted from the National Hurricane Center. Not a big rainmaker, okay? 2 to 4 inches of rain, widespread for people. Of course, you'll have to convert that to millimeters for you folks in Canada. But most of the heaviest rain is down to the south. But this really loses those true tropical characteristics. Therefore, the rainfall really drops off. But this is rainfall in inches for my folks in the U.S., and then inches for my folks in Southeast Canada. Stop the screen if you need to, and I'll flip this to millimeters too. But in general, as far as rainfall in inches, not a ton. I mean, it brings, and this is the European run, but it pretty much matches up from the National Hurricane Center. Rainfall in millimeters, this is what they're shooting for, so stop this. I don't want to name every single number. But this is about how much rain you're expecting. If you notice over here, and kind of the, what is that? I'll have this memorized eventually. The Prince Edward Island area, not a ton of rain for you folks, okay, but certainly going to get some sort of moisture. So that's my update on Lee. We'll do it again tomorrow morning. Let's give you an update on this area of interest out here that will most likely become Nigel. Has a 90% chance to develop from the latest update. This is most likely going to develop into a depression here in the next several days. And this will spark a lot of hype. Okay? But we're going to keep it realistic here. We're going to keep it facts here. But this will become a heavy topic. I'll be honest, I'm kind of over talking about the tropics, but just because I'm over talking about something, that don't mean it's going to stop, right? But this is what's going to be Lee. This is Margot. This is Lee currently. This is what's going to be Nigel. That's what I meant to say. I think I said this is what's going to be Lee. Down here, you see the L. As that number drops, that means it's steadily organizing. And what I want you to notice right off the die is we're getting into Friday, we're getting into Saturday, is this is gaining latitude. This has gained a lot of latitude by midway this weekend. You're thinking this is about to head out to sea. But watch as this is the latest Euro. Watch as this does become a tropical storm sometime this weekend into early next week. And then it begins to move due west. Look at this, and you're thinking, oh no, here we go. And then you keep this run going, and then it becomes a much stronger hurricane. Threatens Bermuda like 8 days from now. Not saying that's going to be what happens, just saying that's what this run says. And then eventually turns north and then northeast and then heads out to sea and doesn't really bother anybody but Bermuda. That's the latest run from the Euro, the latest run from the GFS. Quickly jolts north, gains latitude very quickly, finds a weakness early on, and honestly, the latest GFS keeps that weakness in place, moves due northwest, and then north, and then moves northeast, heads on out to sea. Nigel, soon to be Nigel on the GFS, never touches a soul but fish out here. So be careful what you believe. People are going to hype the mess out of this system. But of course, we still don't know the steering currents of this. So I've talked about this with Lee a lot. And hopefully some of this information I'm about to share with you guys is going to make a lot more sense if you've been tuning in with the steering currents with Lee. But this is what will likely be Nigel. See this blue bob here, an area of low pressure. And if you notice, like we've talked about, okay, there is a weakness here. Yes, you do got some ridging right into here. But this system is already sniffing out a weakness. And that's why it's moving more north and not staying more so kind of east to west. Okay, we'll get this off your screen and we'll keep this moving here. And here it goes. It's turning. You're thinking, oh, well, this is an easy weakness. You got a trough moving in here, and you got a ridge that's not really bearing, kind of forcing the storm further south. And then the ridge flexes on this system. Okay, and then all of a sudden, this is being influenced by this ridge of high pressure that begins to strengthen on top of the system. Therefore, this system goes from going this way to all of a sudden it's having to follow the current around this high pressure, and it begins to move more so west than north again. Okay? But then you keep this going, and it's being affected by this ridge, having to move basically more west than north. But then that ridge okay. All right, we're going to have to wrap this up because I no longer can talk. But this ridge weakens. It sniffs out that weakness, and it's gone. It's heading north and then northeast, and then yeah, doesn't really affect anybody. Now, on the European, it does affect Bermuda, so I don't want to say that. But basically, you kind of see what happens, right? Early on, there's a pretty stout weakness right into here. No ridging building on this storm. Ridge ultimately rebuilds on this storm, forcing it to go more west. And then that weakness, that ridge of high pressure basically weakens, and then this heads north, northeast, and then heads on out to sea. Doesn't bother anybody. So you look at the latest ensemble guidance from the European for 1 week out, and it does show it moving north very quickly. But of course, you still got some members into here that are further south. But a lot of these members are very strong. So I do think Nigel has a chance to be another hurricane. But Nigel has a pretty high chance of going out to sea. But we don't know what. We don't know where a ridge of high pressure and area of low pressure is going to be this far out, just like we didn't with Lee. Okay, there was a lot of models showing Lee going out to sea too, and ultimately we're almost 100% positive this is going to go right into areas of Maine or either southeast Canada. So stay tuned for later updates with soon to be Nigel. We'll keep you covered. That's all I got. God bless all y'all, and have a great night.